some of us as living through a pandemic may have been living a lot in the past. Well, I could do this and I was able to do this. Now I can't do this anymore. And oh, they just told us we're going to lockdown. Now I can't do this anymore. And we become in a place of suffering and judgment and difficulty, because we're not really saying, what's the opportunity of this moment? How can I, align in this moment? How can I be present with this experience, this shift in life? Instead, we're often, we're in the past, we're drumming up all things we could do or could have done or miss or whatever it may be. And it's genuinely okay to acknowledge those feelings, to acknowledge, I miss doing this. But it's when we come from a place of like anger or judgment of like, oh, like I can't do this anymore, blah, blah, blah. Or we're thinking about the future and we're fearful of the future because, we've been in, some of us been in lockdown many times, or still in lockdown, some of us. And then we're afraid for the future. Well, how long is this going to last? Am I ever going to have my life back? We get very dramatic about it. But your life is here. Your life is now. This outside world is always going to be changing. It's always going to be like that. It's never not going to be like that. There's a story. It's actually a Hindu story of a king who went to his advisor, and he said to his advisor, who was a monk, he said, if you could give me one piece of advice for life, that would be the most helpful for like ruling my kingdom and ruling my life, what would it be? Like ruling. I think that sounded a little bit like ruining, ruling. And the monk sat there and said, I think this is it. He said, this too shall pass. And that's what he said to the king. This too shall pass. And the king said, yeah, actually, that sounds like pretty good advice. Okay. And so he went through his life, and he'd say to himself every day, if something happened that wasn't really, in his comfort, this too shall pass, this too shall pass. And eventually, because he was practicing it so much, it just became more natural. And he'd just say it all the time, this too shall pass, too shall pass. And then all of a sudden, the kingdoms became into this huge war. They entered into a huge war, and his people were really suffering, and it wasn't looking very good for him. And the city was overtaken, and he had to escape into the forest. And he ran to the forest, through a field to the edge of this cliff, and realized there's nowhere else he could go. And he just stopped, and he just said, this too shall pass. This too shall pass. And he could hear all of the like horses and the men in the forest, coming for him. And he just said to himself and smiling, this too shall pass, this too shall pass. And all of a sudden he heard the sounds fade, and eventually didn't hear the horses anymore, or the men, and it became very quiet and very silent. And he saw one of his men running out of the forest coming to him, telling them that they won the war. And so they're in their kingdom celebrating, and his advisor, his monk, came up, and they're celebrating, and they're ecstatic, and they're so happy, and they won. And the monk came up and he said to him, this too shall pass. So the moral of the story is that regardless of the great moments of our life or the very difficult moments of our life, this too shall pass. That life is changeable on the outside and fluctuates. And so that we should align ourselves to that space of that all parts of our life is fluid and fluctuating, and to release attachment to one or the other, and to work in a philosophy that this too shall pass.